As we have mentioned, we are witnessing the global land grab movement, driven by high energy, green revolution agriculture. Pension funds are now engaged in land grabs in Brazil. It's not just Africa, but the tropics in general are being subjected to the international mobilization of capital, and large corporations, as well as groups of investors, are getting involved. The retirement funds managed by TIAA and Harvard University, with substantial endowment resources, are getting involved in illegal land deals, grabbing territory in Brazil. It's been exposed in a series of reports that are worth reading in detail. Harvard's billion-dollar farmland fiasco in Brazil is now the subject of international attention and outrage on the part of students who are realizing that having divested from some fossil fuel holdings, Harvard's investment portfolios are being directed towards things like farmland grabs in third world areas, including Africa and Brazil. In fact, TIAA as an organization throughout the country is now being tracked by a group called farmlandgrab.org. And the appeal is being made to stop TIAA's corporate investment in land grabs that foster displacement and threaten biological and ecological destruction. This is now being tracked on a regular basis through the organization Farmland Grab and deserves the attention of all scholars, not just Africanists. In Africa, there is a bit of an irony that's expressed in this whole process. In the state of Ethiopia, you'll recall that Liberia and Ethiopia were the only areas not occupied in the 19th century scramble for African territory. Now, however, Ethiopia is subject to land grabbing in the modern corporate scramble for African farmland. It's pretty ironic. Thanks to the reporting of John Vidal of The Guardian in London, we can learn something of the land grabbing that is underway in other parts of the continent beyond West Africa. In this case, Ethiopia, which had not been occupied during the previous scramble for Africa. Let's take a look.
This is Ethiopia, one of the hungriest countries in the world. But here, foreign companies are spending billions of dollars to grow food for export. An area the size of Britain has been handed over to corporations in the last 3 years. It's called a land rush. I'm in Ethiopia's remote southwest Gambela region to investigate claims that large numbers of small farmers are being moved off their land by the government.
Now all this land for the next hour of our driving is going to be some kind of farming, intensive industrial agriculture.
We're driving west through Karaturi Farm, a new Indian venture, where large areas of forest are already being cleared to grow palm oil, rice and sugar.
Are you going there? Hello. Hello.
It will be one of the largest farms in Africa, but most of the food will be exported. Populations are growing, so this has to be good for the world. But what about Ethiopia's poor? The man in charge is Kamjit Shekon.
So how big will this whole farm be?
Phase 1, 100,000 hectares.
After that?
After the second phase, 100,000 plus 200,000.
So 300,000 hectares. And if I started walking to one end, how long would it take me to get to the other end?
100,000 hectares is about 121 kilometers.
120 kilometers, that's 80, 90 miles.
90 miles.
That's big.
Yeah.
That's as big as Wales. So will you plant, will you build a town just by here?
Yes, do you see that those trees?
Yes.
There will be the town, next camp coming up.
So that will become 2 and that will be 10,000 people.
Maybe 10 to 15,000.
Karaturi says it will build home schools and clinics for as many as 60,000 workers. But on one of their other Ethiopian farms, similar promises made by the government have yet to be fulfilled. In addition, we found they pay most workers under $1 a day. That's well below what the World Bank says is extreme poverty.
I think that because you were the first people here, you've got the best land. I think you've got the river access.
We never saw the land.
Yeah, oh, you never saw it?
They gave it to us, we took it.
Seriously?
Seriously.
You did not even see it?
Yes,
They offered it to you?
offered. That's all.
Oh, yeah.
Khair
This has to be the deal of the century. 1,000 square miles for just £150 a week. Plus, they get tax breaks, roads built for them by the government.
Now, presumably, all the trees, all the forests which we see at the moment will have to come down so you can plant these. Is that inevitable, or is that just...
It's inevitable.
Yeah,
You have to
yeah.
clear this.
Yeah.
Then there has to be a road network
Yes.
for harvest.
So it's very mechanized, it's very industrialized, it's very precise.
Karaturi says their land was sparsely populated and denied displacing local villagers. On the way back to Gambella town, we passed a group of shacks along the side of the road, near where other foreign companies are moving in.
This is Kami village, which we think is full of displaced people, but we'll see. Well, these people clearly haven't been here for very long. These are very rudimentary tents.
Around 250 people have been living here for 8 months.
Chief, thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you very much indeed. And most of the people here displaced from other areas. Why did they have to move?
ለምሳሌ መንግስት መጀመሪያ ቀስቀሳ ሲናደርገልን ዳኛው በፈላጎት ጥሩ ነገር እንዲሰሩልን አሁን በየቦታ ተበታትነው ነው ያለው.
The government moved these people and told them they would get a health clinic, a school, as well as fresh drinking water. So far, only the foundations have been dug.
Okay, these people are pastoralists. They're quite used to moving backwards and forwards across land. What they don't realise is this land may be taken away from them forever. That would be very different.
There was one image, which I don't know if you saw it, but keep an eye out for it. If we go back over it here, one image that was very powerful, captured by the cameraman and John Vidal's crew. An individual standing with an AK-47 machine gun right next to the interview space where John Vidal was talking to an elder of the village about the displacement of populations in this area of Ethiopia. Take a look again at the footage. It reminds us of the violence of the Green Revolution that has been written about extensively by Vandana Shiva, the Indian scholar. As she puts it, Third World Agriculture, Ecology, and Politics, the violence of the Green Revolution.
Karaturi says their land was sparsely populated and denied displacing local villagers. On the way back to Gambella town, we passed a group of shacks along the side of the road, near where other foreign companies are moving in.
This is Kami village, which we think is full of displaced people, but we'll see. Well, these people clearly haven't been here for very long. These are very rudimentary tents.
Around 250 people have been living here for 8 months.
Chief, thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you very much indeed. And most of the people here displaced from other areas.
ከሌላ ቦታ በየቦታ ወደ ስንት አራት እንትኑ ንስ ቀበሌዎች ናቸው እዚህ የመጡ.
Why did they have to move?
አይደለም ተስማምቶ ነው በፈላጎት ነው. ለምሳሌ መንግስት መጀመሪያ ቀስቀሳ ሲናደርገልን ዳኛው በፈላጎት ጥሩ ነገር እንዲሰሩልን አሁን በየቦታ ተበታትነው ነው ያለው.
The government moved these people and told them they would get a health clinic, a school, as well as fresh drinking water. So far, only the foundations have been dug.
Okay, these people are pastoralists. They're quite used to moving backwards and forwards across land. What they don't realise is this land may be taken away from them forever. That would be very different for them.
I'm going to the state government to find out how many companies have come to Gambella.
Hello.
And we want to know how many people will be affected by the land rush.
We've got 3 maps here in the investment office. This is the extraordinary map because it shows that for the last, for 10 years, 12 years, there's been just about nothing. In 2007, it started going right up. Since then, there have been hundreds, and I've just been told that the total number of investors in Gambella region is 896. Now, that is an extraordinary figure from absolutely nothing only 10 years ago.
Kasahun Zerfu is one of the department's senior officials.
What countries are they coming from?
India, Saudi Arabia, and China, and so forth.
Can you explain why you are relocating villages?
We relocate villagers to obtain clean water in one place, to obtain medical services.
So the two things are very separate. One is the relocation, the deliberate relocation of villages,
Yeah.
and the second thing is the investment by the foreigners, and the two have no link whatever.
There is no link. Yeah.
So it's a coincidence
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
villages are relocating.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So the villagers, when they relocate, can they go back to their land?
No.
They can't go back to their land.
Yeah.
So
it
who
is because
takes
it's
the land?
voluntary relocation.
It's all voluntary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
right.
Kasahun said as many as 15,000 people are being moved, but at the same time, thousands of square miles are being cleared. Great swathes of Gambella are being ecologically devastated. Carbon emissions will rise and wildlife will vanish. I had been told about a village not far from the Karaturi farm that had been cleared just weeks ago. Actually, the whole of this was the village. So it's not just a few houses which we see left there. All of this was actually a village pretty recently. There's nothing left. They've all gone. And they've left the storage pots. We don't know the name of the village, but we do know that people were here about 5 months ago. Gambella is up for grabs, and foreign investors are not the only ones moving into the region. Wealthy Ethiopians from other parts of the country are also leasing huge areas of land.
Okay, we've just stopped the car because we found a small group of people who may have something to say about the burning down of this forest.
Many of the villagers we met were too scared to talk to us about what was happening, but one man was willing to speak on condition we disguised his identity.
Have you tried to stop the bulldozers? Have you tried to stop them setting fire to the ground?
The farmer told me he didn't want to move to a resettlement village.
Will they have to forcibly evict you?
The man was frightened of being beaten up by soldiers. Some farmers have reportedly disappeared or been killed for speaking out against the government.
Do you think you're in danger?
Later that day, we returned to Addis Ababa. Ethiopia's government is desperate for development and jobs for its growing population, and you can understand why it wants to attract foreign investment to a country that can't grow enough food for itself. But I still wasn't sure if the land rush in Gambella was in the people's best interests. I put what we'd seen in Gambella to the Minister for Agriculture, Wonderad Mandefro.
Minister, when we were down there, we saw a lot of evidence of people having to move because of the investors moving into the area. Can you confirm that, please?
By the way, there is no movement of population.
Minister, with respect, we found many villagers who were frightened, who were worried, who had been told that they would have to move.
It's their choice. Either to choose to have these basic services come to the village, therefore it's based on their willingness. But of course, they have to abandon their previous way of life. You cannot provide any basic services having highly scattered community.
So you have 3 million people, 2.9 million, 2.8 million, who this year will receive food aid from America, from Europe, from wherever, at the same time as you are trying to export large amounts of food and commodities to America and other countries. Is this not sort of rather complete madness?
You said madness, but it is not madness, and it's a correct way.
The government is saying that Ethiopia's poor will only become less reliant on aid if they give up their old way of life, and that large-scale industrial farming in places like Gambella is not just the future, but a development necessity.
We've just come out from the minister, and clearly he's hoping for an enormous increase in productivity in farming in Ethiopia. The danger, clearly, is that the companies take advantage of this, that they will grow what they want to grow, and they will sell it to whom they want to sell it, and the real benefit for Ethiopia will never be seen at all. And the real danger for Ethiopia is that they would have given away their land for next to nothing.
In terms of human rights and the political deals, it's important to recall the false promises made to assure corporate access to land in the first place. As it was said in the Bakanga Lonzo case in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you'll recall, the translation was very clear. They asked us to give them the land for the establishment of an agricultural village. Now remember the false promise here. They were going to give them new installed water supplies and a health clinic and new habitations. But that never materialized. As the chief went on to point out, we may have given them permission for an agricultural village, but we never gave our assent to an agro-industrial park. In terms of ecological destruction, it's important to recognize that all these schemes are predicated upon an expansion of, not a transition away from, petro-intensive agriculture. Moreover, this is being financed by and for the benefit of the world's largest banks and corporations, as well as its richest people. Bill Gates has emerged on the scene. He now owns the most farmland of anyone in America. As the Forbes magazine has pointed out, he's become the biggest private owner of farmland in the United States. And then in the Guardian newspaper, they ask why. And they then go on to answer the question. He sees farmland as an amazing new opportunity for gaining more riches. This is why he's come out in his own foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation, and started to tout the advantages of fertilizer. A piece called Why I Love Fertilizer. Well, the largest landowner of farmland in America has now embraced more fertilizer. Furthermore, he went before the American Association for the Advancement of Science and started talking about how gene editing could be of benefit to the world's poorest nations. This is quite extraordinary. He became not only an advocate, but a champion of the biotechnology that was forwarded by the Monsanto Corporation in the tradition of the manipulation of plants by Norman Borlaug during the Green Revolution. Once again, it's important to keep it clear, Norman Borlaug himself never got involved in the genetic manipulation of plants in a microbiological sense. He was a selective breeder. The Green Revolution was based on selective breeding, not on the molecular manipulation of genes. He endorsed it before his death, but he never engaged in it himself. It's Bill Gates who's taken up that theme and championed the new legacy of plant genetic manipulation for enhancing fertilizer responsive crops in the global Green Revolution. He actually calls it that. How to fund the Green Revolution. He has green in mind in two respects here, the greening of the economy and the specific Green Revolution in Africa, which he's funded through groups like the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. He goes on to illustrate in a program, again, from his own foundation called MyAgro, which will enable African farmers through their cell phones to save money in order to buy more fertilizer, agricultural inputs like pesticides and herbicides, and what he calls the new improved seeds, ones that have been altered to respond to the petrochemical package that Monsanto has developed. This is why the transnational land rush in Africa is of major importance for its ecological impact. People like Vandana Shiva have actually started to speak quite widely and quite forcefully against this. In a book called Who Really Feeds the World, she's looked at the failures of agribusiness and the promise of agroecology, suggesting that there is an alternative, and that alternative has in fact proved itself. In the future then, who will really feed the world? Will it be the failed agribusiness models dependent on petro-intensive agriculture, or will it be the promise of agroecology? Will it be what she calls the failure of the Green Revolution and Norman Borlaug's tradition, or will it be agroecology? As she points out, replacing hunger with malnutrition is not a good recipe for stability in the future. And she's pointed out that the UN is calling for fueling the African Green Revolution in the Borlaug tradition. Now, this is an unfortunate mistake, as she emphasizes. This is one of the failures of agribusiness. In contrast, the promise of agroecology is based on a new understanding of what's needed to sustain agriculture in the tropics in the long run. As she points out, it's time to abandon failing Green Revolution technology. Not replicate it, but abandon it. The Gates Foundation is leading Africa to failure. Agribusiness failures, and the promise instead of agroecology. Basically, when Big Pharma buys Big Ag, it leads to even bigger pharma problems with potentially fatal ecological consequences on a global scale. Monsanto, as we pointed out, already owns the world's biggest portion of the patented crops, and it's seeking to extend its control even further to be able to plant Roundup ready organisms that they've packaged as seeds, organisms that can withstand the aerial bombardment of glyphosate while everything else in the field is killed. But the question remains, can humans survive a petrochemical food future? Well, scientists are beginning to say, as Vandana Shiva has made it clear, that this is not possible. They're saying, no, we can't survive a petro-intensive agricultural food system. These trends have provoked a worldwide movement to reject Big Pharma and its approach to our agricultural future. As she's put it, Bill Gates is continuing the work of Monsanto. In an interview with France 24, this is made very clear. Even if you haven't found it in the English-speaking press in America, it's fascinating that the French have conducted interviews in English on their own radio and television networks. This one by Vandana Shiva makes it very clear. Let's listen.
Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Vandana Shiva. She is a world-famous environmental activist from India. She's a laureate of the Alternative Nobel Prize in 1993. She's author of numerous books. Her latest is called Oneness versus 1%. Thank you very much for being on the phone.
My pleasure.
I want to begin early on. You were not supposed to be an activist. You were a physicist, you wanted to work in nuclear energy, and then you came across in the early 1970s what is known in India as the Shipko movement. Can you explain us how you came across?
Yes, I was training to be in India's nuclear establishment, but then my sister woke me up to the hazards of nuclear. She was a medical doctor, and I went deeper into theoretical physics. I was going to Canada to do a PhD in the foundations of quantum theory, and before I went, I wanted to visit some of my favorite forests in the Himalaya. I've grown up in the Himalaya forest, and this forest I had trekked in was gone. The stream that came from this oak forest was gone, and while returning to Delhi, I talked to a tea shop owner, and he talked about how there's a new movement called Chipko. So in my heart, I said, I'm going to come back every vacation and be a volunteer for this movement. Women came out to say, we're going to hug the trees. You cannot cut the trees because from the trees come our water. The trees stabilize the mountain and prevent landslides. The trees prevent floods and droughts, and they also give us everything we need. We will be huggers of trees. The name Chipko means to hug. And I learned all my lessons of ecological activism from the women of the Himalaya who had never been to school but knew everything about ecology, knew everything about biodiversity. What they called soil, water, and pure air today talked about is ecological functions of the forests. That forests are not timber mines. And a lot of my change in the understanding of the fact that nature is the basis of economy came from my engagement with Chipko. My respect for women's knowledge, indigenous knowledge, came from my engagement with Chipko. And it totally turned my own head upside down because physics, high in the world, you know something others don't. I realized everyone has knowledge and you must respect it.
So you've became really engaged in this. You've been an opponent of big multinational corporations, especially Monsanto, to name just one, because of what you describe as their nefarious influence on agriculture. There are a number of examples. There was the Bt cotton in India, especially. And you said, this is not a matter of helping farmers grow their land, but actually making them dependent on those big corporations.
The entry of corporations into agriculture, it's so wrong because the corporations only bring poisons. Most of them have roots in Hitler's Germany in making gases to kill people in concentration camps.
That was not their aim. Their aim was to give people enough.
No. The aim was to make chemicals that kill people. After the wars, they said, why should we stop making these chemicals? Let's say now they'll kill pests. They will give fertilizer. Fertilizers were made in the same factories that made explosives and ammunition for Hitler's Germany.
That's not the same goal.
No, the companies are the same and the processes are the same. So your rhetoric might change, but the goal does not. The materiality of a death-making chemical doesn't change when you say it's now for feeding the world. I did a book on the violence of the Green Revolution because Punjab, the most fertile land of India, was destroyed. And then when Monsanto came in as a result of globalization, because till the 90s, 90% of the seed was in farmers' hands, and the rest came from the public sector, from the government labs, the research institutions. So Monsanto came illegally, didn't take any approval, with the promise that they would increase farmers' incomes and have this magical technology to control pests. Well, the bollworm is now resistant. Farmers are in debt. Farmers are committing suicide. The area has been ruined. The pollinators are gone. There's no pollinator. The groundwater is gone. So there's nothing about the ecosystem. So I save seeds. We brought organic cotton seeds back. We work with the Gandhi ashrams on hand spinning and hand weaving of this organic cotton. The economy in the villages where we work has jumped tenfold because now the wealth is staying in the village rather than being siphoned off as Monsanto's profits. And I read a new study that says because we've saved seeds, we brought local seeds that can be saved back into the economy. Monsanto has lost 11 million.
I want to get to your latest book because you widen, I would say, your attacks not only Monsanto and the likes, but also others. You attack what you describe as the billionaire dictators, especially one man, I should say, Bill Gates, who you describe as a Christopher Columbus. I'm quoting you of modern times, and that's not a compliment, obviously, whose mission is to impose, quote unquote, genetically modified organisms and digital dictatorship to small farmers across the world. Bill Gates, who's donated billions to improve public health in poor countries and so on, you're saying essentially he's a dictator and he's there not to help, but to make people poor, more dependent.
Well, Bill Gates is actually continuing the work of Monsanto because Monsanto had so many movements, and we held a tribunal on Monsanto. A buyer bought up Monsanto, but when Bill Gates pours money into Africa for feeding the poor in Africa and preventing famine, what's he doing? He's pushing the failed green revolution. He's pushing chemicals, pushing GMOs, pushing patents, and now pushing new.
Knowingly, or he thinks it's a good thing and he may be wrong.
Well,
It's not the same thing.
There's enough evidence of what it does. There are enough letters to him from farmers of Africa, from governments of Africa to say this is not the way to go. The United Nations accepts agroecology, working with ecological systems as the best way to go. Now, Bill Gates is trying very hard to shift the patenting issue now to digital. So you just take a genomic map and you say, my invention, you don't create seed. Seed is self-organized, self-making, and evolution in continuity. Just by making a map, a genome, and you have no idea what the seed does. And this is something he's pushing very, very hard. My book records how he financed DivSeek. I've talked about how he's pirated seeds we have saved that tolerate salt and floods. And he says invention. This biopiracy is a bit like Columbus, where Columbus was supposed to have discovered America, when he basically went to pirate. Why do I call him today's Columbus? Because he's carving out new colonies. Software should have stayed open software.
So you say he has a strategy, a nefarious strategy, what you describe as philanthrocapitalism, is a nefarious enterprise. And so you're not saying he's using the wrong method, he's pursuing a wrong goal with self-interest. You also attack Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, saying they're all linked together. I mean, this reeks a bit of conspiracy theory, doesn't it?
Well, my book is based on the new evidence that's coming out. All you have to do is see the ownership, and I have data in the book on how there's common ownership. We stopped Mark Zuckerberg from trying to get into Indian agriculture. It was a big mobilization of people who believe in the open internet.
What did he want to do?
Well, basically what they do is they mine the data from the farmers. And right now, all over the world, there's new debates on privacy issues, on the data mining. There's new books on new form of capitalism, which is surveillance capitalism, where you basically have turned human beings into your new raw material. Bill Gates does both. He takes living resources and our seeds and biodiversity, mines it into data and wants ownership along with his friends. And Mark Zuckerberg mines your data and your behaviors and turns it into the raw material, both of corporate world for selling things, which is why strange advertisements pop up after you've sent a message to a friend, and manipulating elections. I have a chapter in the book on the hijack of democracy. You have enough data on what happened with Facebook selling data to Cambridge Analytica and how we are popping up with artificial intelligence leaders. This is a major threat to democracy.
So this is why you're calling them billionaire dictators, because you think they're not helping democracy, but actually threatening and even killing it? I mean, isn't this a bit too much?
No, I have grown up in an India that was post-independence. I've grown up in an India that had absolutely no corporations. I've grown up in an India where democracy works. And therefore, when I see the imposition of digital transactions and criminalization of cash between poor people, I basically see this as a dictatorship. I call it a digital dictatorship. When I watch, not just in India, but in Africa and other parts of the world, now that we have the data that is showing that native seeds have more nutrition, they produce more food, they have no cost because you don't have to use chemicals, that local biodiversity is the way to feeding the world, in spite of all that evidence, in spite of the evidence in the United Nations and the FAO and UNCTAD, every agency, Bill Gates is still imposing and forcing GMOs, which is a failed enterprise. And he's not just imposing GMOs, he's taking what has failed and rejected by governments. My government threw the BTO gene of Monsanto out. Bill Gates resurrects it in Bangladesh. We rejected the golden rice for solving the problem of blindness. He finances it to continue through Philippines. So he's taking all the failed projects with the wrong thinking that life is like a word program and can be chopped and cut and pasted, when it's an amazing complexity of self-organization, and scientists call it autopoiesis, self-organization, writing your own poetry. That's what life does. He is absolutely ignoring all of this new knowledge that new science is giving us and imposing a failed technology with a huge cost to the planet, only so there can be monopolies and people and farmers aren't free to have their seed.